Hi, this is HealthCall Live Online, the place for extended versions of interviews heard on our weekly radio broadcast, the HealthCall Live Radio Hour. Yeah, we all know that exercise is supposed to help us feel better and think better, but can you target exercise to what you're trying to fix? Can you improve a memory with a specific type of exercise, or maybe improve your cognition with a specific intensity of exercise? It's an interesting question and one that Dr. Jeremy Manning set out to answer. He is the assistant professor of psychological and brain sciences at Dartmouth College. Doctor, thank you for joining us. What's the big takeaway after you've studied about 100 test subjects?
Thanks so much for having me on. One of the most interesting takeaways is that we went into this study thinking that maybe people who exercise might show improvements in their memory or mental health, kind of broadly construed. But what we actually found is that specific types of exercise seem to have different effects on different aspects of mental health or different types of memory. Like one type of memory that we want to rely on in our everyday lives allows us to remember like events from our lives, like what did we do yesterday, or what did we have for dinner on a particular day. That's called episodic memory. Another type of memory lets us remember, where we put our car keys or where we parked our car or something like that. That's called spatial memory, and so on. And it seems like different types of exercise have kind of targeted improvements on specific aspects of memory, and similarly for mental health.
Well, that is interesting. So let's just start there. What did you find with that episodic memory? What type of exercise should I be jumping on?
Well, so actually, one thing to back up, but before I answer that, I just want to emphasize our study is looking at correlations, not causal effects. So to kind of contextualize, the way our study worked is we targeted self-identified active Fitbit users to participate. And then when someone signed up for our study, we asked them to give us access to their anonymized Fitbit data from the past year. And then we had them do a bunch of memory tests and fill out surveys that included questions about their mental health. And then once we had everyone's data, we went back and looked for potential associations between different aspects of their fitness history and mental health and performance on different memory tasks.
Got it.
And so what that means from a scientific perspective is that we could find that people who are feeling stressed out might perform better or worse on a particular memory test, or they might be more or less likely to exercise in a particular way, but we can't know the causal direction of those patterns. So as one example, we found people who report higher levels of stress tend to work out at high intensities, but we can't know from our study whether people who are stressed out are driven by their stress to work out in that way, or whether high intensity exercise causes stress, or maybe there's some third set of factors that explains their stress and their tendency to work out hard.
Okay, I got that. So it's just a relation. It's just an association, not necessarily a cause and effect. Got that. But that's
That's
an
right.
interesting relationship to understand nonetheless. If the propensity of the people in your study who did a particular type of exercise were good at something else, then the evidence kind of leads us in that direction, right? So, for example, when I go to the gym, I tend to focus on strength training as opposed to cardio work because, quite frankly, I think that's kind of boring stuff. So, the strength training is where I tend to focus. Do we know what that is likely to enhance? What type of cognitive performance or mental performance that's likely to enhance?
So we didn't track what specific type of exercise people did. If you are familiar with Fitbit, um,
Mhm.
you know, Fitbits are these wrist-worn devices. They're wonderful devices and they're super convenient for research. But different kind of Fitbit models may or may not track the specific type of exercise someone's engaging in, and often it's even if you have one of the kind of newer, fancier models, it's just a guess based on some Fitbit algorithm. Um, so what we can know most precisely is kind of the intensity of the workout. So when someone's heart rate increases to a particular heart rate zone, or when a workout lasts for a particular duration, that sort of thing. So we really kind of focused in our study on different intensities of exercise, kind of like sedentary, low intensity, medium intensity, or like super high intensity.
Got it. So does that mean that the more intensely I exercise, the greater the benefit? I mean, that's, I'm assuming, what most people would think, right? The harder I go at this, the better it's going to be.
Well, we thought that might be the case, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems like each intensity has kind of a unique pattern of benefits to memory and mental health. So, for example, kind of the low intensity exercise that tends to people who tend to work out at kind of low intensity, so the like fat burn heart rate, they tend to have really good memories for autobiographical events. People who work out at really high intensities tend to have great spatial memory, and so on.
So give me an example of spatial memory. What are we talking about there? I know how you tested it. You took a look at where, if people could remember where a dot was on the screen, so to speak, right?
Well, we had so it was like a bunch of different shapes that we randomly placed on the screen, and then um, we kind of made these increasingly uh, more difficult tests where you had to memorize, first two shapes and then three shapes and then all the way up to seven shapes. So we kind of flashed the shapes up on the screen and then, uh, you know, move them off to the side, and then you had to kind of drag back the different shapes to where their original positions were. So it's a pretty tough test, and it uses the same sorts of memory machinery in your brain as the type of memory that lets you kind of remember, like where you put your car keys, or um, you know where something where something is located.
So if I'm concerned about dementia, is that the type of exercise and the type of memory skill I need to be paying attention to?
So dementia is often associated with like episodic memory or memory for events. So that would kind of tie in best with low intensity exercise. So we saw the um, strongest association between the amount of low intensity exercise people did and their autobiographical memory.
So high intensity with spatial, low intensity with that kind of remembering events and things. Okay, that's interesting. So low
That's
intensity
right. Yeah.
being walking or that kind of activity, right?
Yeah. So anything that triggers the kind of Fitbit fat burn heart rate. So like walking upstairs, going for kind of a, you know, relaxed walk, kind of conversational paced walk, anything that kind of gets your heart rate a little bit above the kind of sedentary resting heart rate,
Mhm.
but not so hard that you're, breaking a sweat or kind of really feeling the workout.
So does that high intensity workout that, where you're really cranking and drawing a sweat, does that have benefits in any area?
Yeah, so that benefits spatial memory. So where, or well, as I said, we don't know the causal direction. So people who work out at high intensities tend to have better spatial memories. We don't know if the exercise causes the improvement or whether there's some kind of other factor. Um, we also saw mental health differences depending on how people worked out. So um, again, we don't know the causal direction, but people who reported high levels of stress, either kind of during our experiment, or we also asked them about like their typical levels of stress. People who tend to be stressed out um, also were those same people who worked out at very high intensities. So we don't know whether stress causes people to work out at high intensities, or whether high intensity workouts cause stress, um, or whether there's some other factor. Um, but that kind of seems like association in the direction where, well, you might not want to. Well,
Just
most people don't want to be stressed, so
right, yeah.
you might want to kind of look into that. Yeah, or
I
that's
get
something we
it.
want to
So
explore.
if I'm just a really wound up, uptight, go get 'em kind of person, I might exercise with that sort of nature, but it's not necessarily associated. I get that. I understand how that works. Yeah.
Yeah, and it could even be that you feel really stressed. You go for like a hard run. That's a high intensity workout. That might make you feel less stressed than you would have otherwise felt. So we don't know that what would have happened if you hadn't exercised. We can't
Yeah.
go back in time and manipulate, of course.
Yeah, I get that. Sure, because you looked at a year's worth of accumulated data. So you were looking at that retrospectively. So knowing what you
Exactly.
know, can I use this information to develop a therapeutic exercise or fitness program for somebody maybe with Asperger's syndrome or ADHD or some other kind of behavioral component?
That's what we're working towards. So kind of where my lab is going with this research is we're trying to develop exercise recommendations that can target specific aspects of cognitive or mental health. So when you go to the gym and you want to bulk out your arms, we already know there are specific exercises you can do to target the relevant muscle groups. um, and then we know also kind of physiologically what happens. So there's a stress response in your muscles that leads to increased growth. But we want to know, what if there are particular forms of exercises or intensities of exercise that could be specifically designed to help your brain, like a study for an upcoming exam, or a help me improve my mood workout routine. um,
Mm-hmm.
so the first step to figuring out those sorts of like brain enhancement exercise recommendations is to find a set of candidate associations between how people exercise and then different aspects of their brain function. And that's what this study is really trying to find. So we're trying to get our like initial database, and then in follow-up work, we'll be working on nailing down kind of the causal directions of some of those associations.
I got it. So there's this mountain, just stacks and stacks and stacks of Fitbit data from people all over the world that we've never had before. What are you eager to get a hold of that stuff? What can that tell us going forward? How might we use that data?
So one thing we're really excited about is, we collected a century's worth of Fitbit data across all our subjects. So that's a quite a lot of data. And in addition to our study, where we kind of, I'd say, looked, right at the tip of the iceberg of kind of all the patterns that are in the data, we've released our data set publicly. So anyone who wants can freely download our data set and find their own patterns, or kind of interesting, ask interesting questions that they're kind of excited about. Um, and of course, out in the world, there's even more data that Fitbit has, or Apple Health has collected. And I think it'll be exciting to see, um, you know, what people do with those data sets.
Yeah, I think so too. Applying artificial intelligence to that massive amount of data could be really interesting as we go forward. So, in what you learned, has that changed anything that you do in your personal life or when you go to the gym?
So, um, one question that we've kind of had in our minds is like, how much working out is needed to like see an effect? Um, that's kind of a basic question. And one takeaway is there's kind of like good news and bad news. So on the plus side, people who worked out on the same day that they did our memory tests tended to perform better. Um, and like the intensities they uh, worked out at seem to target different aspects of their memory. So that could mean that working out just once at a particular intensity could give you some kind of measurable benefit. And those benefits seem to last quite a while. So, to a very small extent, at least, we even see some residual of that workout like a year later.
Hmm.
So that's really exciting. But on the flip side, we also saw that people who had been consistently working out at a particular intensity for at least a year showed, like, they also showed differences in their memory performance. And working out consistently for a year is a lot better than just doing a single workout. So it's kind of, you've got these two sides. So on the one hand, you see some benefit for some effort, but it does seem like the more effort you put in, over a longer timeline, the kind of better your memory performance is.
Yeah, that is a funny thing. I've talked to exercise science people, and they tell me that for several days after an exercise session, your calorie utilization and your just your general metabolism pace is increased for several days after exercise. So, yeah, I get how that could play. Do we know what's happening in the brain to cause this? So, if I'm a weightlifter, and as you said, I'm working on my biceps. I'm doing curls, and so I'm working on that particular muscle. Do we know what's happening in the brain? Can I exercise this way to affect that part of the brain?
Yeah, so we didn't look at that in our study, but that's one of the things we're thinking about. So we know, for example, that you've probably heard of, when you go running, you get endorphin release. So there's a whole kind of range of hormones, some of which are neurotransmitters. So kind of chemicals that cross the blood-brain barrier and can affect your brain, that affects your brain activity, how different, brain areas connect with each other. Um, there's a whole kind of chemical story and map that could be kind of exploited, where maybe it starts with an exercise and different forms of exercise cause different chemical release, and each kind of profile of chemical release could have different effects on the brain. And so we didn't look at this in our study, but it's definitely on our minds that maybe this could be kind of hacked to design these exercises.
Yeah, that is interesting. We talked briefly, or you mentioned briefly, the memory benefits of low intensity exercise. What about mood elevation? If I'm depressed or anxious, is there a form or an intensity of exercise I should be thinking about?
Yeah, let me just pull that up.
Sure.
Let's see. Um,
I find that real interesting because all the research that I've read, goes back to that whole idea of exercise helps your brain, and they still, as you just said, they think it has to do with the dopamine release or one of the endorphin releases. But be curious to see what you found.
yeah, so one we so the kind of links between the different intensities of exercise people engaged in and specific aspects of mental health are quite complex. Um, One of the things we found, there's some kind of simple relationships. So we found that people who engage in more kind of low to medium intensity activity tend to be less anxious and depressed. So that would kind of speak to your mood improvement, potential for mood improvement idea. Um, on the flip side, as I had mentioned earlier, people who work at high intensities tend to also report higher levels of stress. Um, so there could be something interesting there where the intensity of workout could be kind of targeted to kind of change your mood in particular ways. Again, though, we don't know the causal direction. So, uh, right.
It's interesting. I know it's early. I know there are so many variables associated with this. So tell me real quickly, what's the next step? Where are you headed next in your research?
Well, we really want to understand the kind of causal direction of these effects. So the experiments we're gearing up to run next are they involve targeted exercises where we think there's some association based on the study we just ran. We want to know, if we ask people to engage in that form of exercise, can we control or predict in advance which aspects of their cognitive or mental health will be changed as a result of engaging in that exercise. And then we're also looking at different timelines or schedules of particular kind of exercise regimens. So maybe, working out at a low intensity on day one, taking a break on day two, working out at a high intensity on day three. How does that play out in your kind of memory and mental health kind of benefits in the future, or costs in the future potentially?
Yeah, it's all so fascinating, and it's all enabled by the ability to capture all that data just by wearing a little gadget on your wrist. It's all pretty interesting. The future is going to look a whole lot different because of work of people like you. That's Dr. Jeremy Manning. He's the assistant professor of psychological and brain sciences at Dartmouth College. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much.
I hope that wasn't
All
painful. I
right.
think you did a good job.
Yeah, no, that was great. Yeah, great questions.
Okay, here's a recording test just to see how the audio levels are going to be and what a 50 meg feed looks like if I'm going to record at 50 meg, and see how that looks, and see how my audio is at 50 meg. Hi, this is Health Call Live online, a place for extended versions of interviews you hear each week in our radio broadcast, the Health Call Live Radio Hour. Let's take a look at, we all know that exercise is something we need to do, but just how much is what you need to do? What type of exercise? And does that differ as we age? Well, let's explore all of that with Dr. Jeremy Manning. He is the assistant professor of psychological and brain sciences at Dartmouth College, Dartmouth. All right.